Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bob Unger Show. And we are very privileged to have an unusual guy, a guy with integrity. You know, Diogenes was walking around with a candle, and they said, "Why are you walking around with a candle?" And he said, "I'm looking for an honest man." Well, I'm looking for men with integrity. It's a dying breed, but I think we're lucky and we've got one of the dying breed, to pardon the expression, with us today, Mr. Mark Mix. I got the name right?
You got the name right, Bob. Thanks. Pretty
Okay.
easy. Yeah, thankfully it's easy to spell, even when I was a young kid. Yeah,
Well, my name, Bob, you can spell it backwards and you still.
that's right.
And he is are you the director or the CEO, or what's your title?
Well, they put me as the president, which is
Okay.
kind of a high altitude for a guy like me, but that's what they call me. Yeah, yeah.
Of the National Right to Work Committee.
Mhm.
These days, not only do you not have a right to work, they don't want you to work.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the organization, its genesis, the basics of what you do and what you're trying to accomplish. And then we'll get into the meat and potatoes.
Sure, Bob. It's real simple. We have two organizations: the National Right to Work Committee, which was founded in 1955 by 5 railway employees who had just been subjected to forced union dues payments by the United States Congress in 1951. They joined together and said, we shouldn't be forced to pay union dues to get or keep a job in the railroad industry. So they got together with a couple of small businessmen and they started the National Right to Work Committee. And since then, our sole mission at the Right to Work Committee is to not only protect individual workers' rights, but to try to expand them. And in order to expand the rights, we have to go all the way back to 1935 during the Roosevelt administration, when, the time that we had an economic crisis, Bob, and I know you've studied economic crises and you know all about this, and how it's a great opportunity for governments to dramatically expand their power. We're seeing it today, right now in America, with the trillions of dollars that are just flying out of Washington, papering over all kinds of mismanagement and all kinds of problems. And it's temporary, to say the least. But Roosevelt had a nice financial crisis on his hands, and he decided, and his handlers decided, they were going to dramatically expand the power of the federal government. And one thing they did, as it relates to labor policy, is they basically said the federal government is going to take over private sector labor management relations. They're going to take it from the states and they're going to put it out as a federal decree. And part of that federal power grab was this idea that you could be forced to join a private organization. And not only could you be forced to join a private organization, you could be forced to pay dues to that private organization to keep your job. I mean, unbelievable, but true. It was there, and they passed it, and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld it in 1937 in a case called Jones versus McLaughlin Steel, which was the last time that a president threatened to pack the U.S. Supreme Court with 6 new members. And that's what's called the switch in time saves 9. It was this case and one other case relating to federal kind of usurpation of power that basically held the court at 9 until maybe next week. Who knows? Or whenever this gets broadcast, it may be more than that, maybe 13 if we understand the news correctly today. But so from that period forward, organized labor officials were just granted with dramatic powers over workers. And from 1937 to 1947, you can guess what happened to the labor movement. Literally 4 million workers across the country were on strike at various times. And union officials, using this tremendous privilege they'd been granted, were basically using it to control the industrial economy, not at the end of World War II, but right afterwards. The coal mines shut down until they got their demands. John L. Lewis and a few other of the kind of noteworthy labor bosses at the time understood the power they'd gotten. In 1946, the Congress turned over in that November, and the Congress looked at what they'd done back in the 1930s and said, we went too far. And no doubt, union officials and their power grew extraordinarily, exponentially during that period. But instead of repealing this federal power grab, like they never do, they just tried to reform it. And the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 was a bill that literally was to reform the 1935 Act. It didn't do a whole lot, but one thing that it did do, it allowed states, if by affirmative vote they could outlaw the so-called closed shop, they could pass what are now known as right to work laws. And since that time, just to give you a kind of button up that history, President Truman vetoed the bill. Congress overrode that veto back when overriding a veto was a big deal. I think it was 2/3 of the Senate had to vote. So that was the kind of problems that existed at the time. So as we move forward, we now have 27 states that have passed these laws, and the laws are extremely simple, Bob. They say you have the right to join a union, you have a right to associate with the union, you can do whatever you want with the union within moral parameters, of course, but you can't be compelled to join them or pay fees to keep your job. And that is so simple, and it's such a part of our fabric of institutional individual rights and the idea of this self-government. I think it was Justice Jackson who said some rights should never be subjected to a vote. And the right to work is one of those things that should never be subjected to a vote. You should choose the associations you have. So the committee has done that work since 1955, when these railway employees were thrust under this compulsory unionism regime. In 1968, we realized we could litigate without in a different kind of tax structure. The IRS says that litigation organizations like ours could be 501c3s, which help our donors take tax deductions for the works that we can do and the contributions they give to us. And so we set up our National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Since then, we basically have 21 attorneys that do nothing but represent employees whose rights have been violated by forced unionism schemes. And that legacy of representing employees, suing both employers and union officials, because they're, basically the federal government wants us to believe there's only two parties in the labor relations situation, and that is big business and big labor. The fact of the matter is, even if you disagree with the 1935 law, the flowery language of the preamble of the statute says, like, individual workers shall have the right to associate and mutually benefit with one another, and they also shall have the right to refrain, except if an agreement says they must join a union to get or keep their job. So notwithstanding the flowery language, employees are supposed to be part of the equation of labor policy. And frankly, the way the law has progressed and the way the precedents have progressed, the individual's been left out of the equation. The foundation has done a lot to rectify that and hopefully bring the employees back into the debate about what their rights should be in the workplace. We've gone to the U.S. Supreme Court 18 times on behalf of individual employees. As I speak to you today, we have about 250 active cases on behalf of employees across the country in state courts in front of Personnel Employee Relations Board. We have employees we're representing at the National Labor Relations Board. We have employees we're representing in the federal court system, in the federal courts of appeals, all across the country doing free legal work and helping employees exercise their rights. Ultimately, by helping the employee, we believe and we strive to help everyone that can benefit from precedents we set. For example, and I'll turn it over at this point, but our biggest case to date was in June of 2018, where we argued a case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court called Janus v. AFSCME. We took a state employee from the state of Illinois, got him into the federal court system because he was opposed to being forced to pay union dues and fees to keep his job, to work for his government. We went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and on June 27, 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that no government worker at any level of government anywhere in America could be forced to pay dues or fees to a union to keep their jobs, because everything that government unions do is politically connected. So what a huge victory and what a great legacy. But as you might guess, Bob, there's always more to do. And there is more to do.
Well, what you're saying is that before that, even though the employee had no, what they would call, privity of contract, he's not a party to the agreement, and yet he's subjected to the agreement, even though he never agreed to it.
Yeah, that's right, Bob. And when you think about the elements of common law, I'm not a lawyer. We have enough attorneys.
Congratulations.
Already. Yeah. Meeting of the mind for someone that voted no for a union. There's no meeting of the minds for someone who opposes what the union does politically. There's really, the unions would have us believe there's consideration, but is the consideration, if you're a teacher that's been in the classroom for 35 years and decides not to show up, is there any consideration to the young science teacher who wants to engage and create the imagination of their students so they love what they do and they're interested in learning? And the guy that's been there for 35 years that throws a basketball out onto the court in the morning and says, go play ball, it makes more because he's simply been there longer. There's no consideration for that for a young, aggressive teacher who wants to teach mathematics to students in the school who can't get a raise because he hasn't been there long enough, and he has to sit and watch in the faculty room as teachers who are just holding space that he can't. It tends to take the best workers, make them mediocre, takes the worst workers and protects them, and that's what compulsory unionism does. So when you look at forced unionism in under common law, contract law, agency law, it fails everywhere except for the legality. And we're working on that. We're trying to make it illegal. So, but you're right. That's a great point.
I always say that even I, at my old age of being a seasoned citizen, even I can beat LeBron James if the basket is only a foot off the ground. So a foot, he doesn't have a chance.
Yeah.
And that's what we've done. Actually, we've done it in every area of endeavor, not just with labor relations, but across the board. We have put everything down to the lowest common denominator. There's a book by Dr. Charlotte Iserbyt, Isbyt. She used to be the head of research for the Department of Miseducation, the Department of Education in the Reagan years. And she wrote a book called Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. And it's all about this lowering of standards. And you see it everywhere. I mean, I talked to one of the chief bar examiners of the United States. And even though she's politically correct, she essentially told me on the phone that this is the dumbest group of law school graduates to ever get out of school. And I'm seeing this everywhere. And this is because socialism creates equal incompetence and makes everybody equally poor and miserable. But, you know, you have this concept in socialism that I don't care if I'm in bad shape as long as everyone else is.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, my son was a professional baseball player. He was drafted by the Yankees. And I remember that the parents used to protest that he was being allowed to play because it made their kids feel bad.
Oh.
Instead of saying, wait a minute, here's somebody who has an expertise that we can learn from and emulate and try to improve ourselves. But instead of that, it was the crab in the barrel syndrome. You want to pull the next crab out so he can't climb out into any kind of success.
Yeah.
I mentioned to you in the pre-interview that I try to ask questions that the average person is going to ask. And one of the most asked questions are always, I don't understand. I don't want to be a member of the union. Why am I paying dues in New York? And why is that happening? And you explain it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you're in the private sector, it's because the federal government has imposed that on you. They have given union officials the ability to compel you to pay dues or fees, or the union official goes to the employer and says, hey, Bob's not paying up. He didn't agree to a dues deduction out of his paycheck, and we can't get him to write a check to us on a monthly basis. So if he doesn't pay, he's got to be fired. And the employer says, well, Bob's the best worker I got. He makes 8 widgets an hour. I can't fire him. And they say, well, sir, go look at the contract. The union security clause in our contract says if Bob doesn't pay dues, he doesn't work. So the federal law imposes that on New York State private sector workers. In the public sector, you might guess it's Albany that does that. And frankly, Albany doesn't have that power anymore after our Janus victory in 2018. My brother is a 4th grade school teacher in the New York State school system. He teaches in a little small school way over in Western New York, a long way away from the big city and a long way away from Albany. And, you know, he was compelled to pay fees to a union he vehemently disagreed with, not only their political orientations and their political support, but just their views about education in general. My brother was voted like teacher of the year in 3 counties in Western New York. And yet, if he didn't pay $39 a month to the union, he couldn't work. And, you know, so forced unionism comes right to the mixed household. As I was a young man growing up, my stepfather was a 32-year member of the machinist union. He was a welder, worked at a plant called Foster Wheeler, working on huge boilers and things that, you know, were important to us then, I guess, in buildings and trains and everything else. And I remember when he went on strike in 1976 and everything shut down and things got real silent at the house and things got real tight at the house. And, you know, now we look back on it and we think about what happened. And frankly, the issues that were involved in that were basically union official issues. They weren't union worker issues. They were union official issues about power and control of a workforce. You know, so the state of Albany has this power that they've imposed on public sector workers in your state that basically say you can be forced into associating with the union as a condition of your employment, meaning you have to accept them as your spokesman. So it's almost like, in a situation where you have disagreed with someone and you want to go talk to your boss, let's say the school board, you're a teacher and you want to go talk to the school board about a problem in the school. If you're not a union member, you can't talk to the school board because you got to have a union official talk on your behalf because they have this monopoly privilege that was granted by the legislature in Albany. And it's interesting, Bob, because Albany is kind of unique. It used to be about 10 years ago. It's probably, and because I'm getting aged too, I get 5 years on either side of the actual date. That's my bell curve now is on my memory. But anyway, there was a time when the Democrats were very smart in New York. They would make sure that the union's power to force workers to pay dues would sunset every 2 years. So they could go back to, the union politicians and say, hey, look, this is sunsetting. You gotta pony up to my campaign in order for us to renew your power to force these workers into these forced associations and into paying dues. So, but it's changed now. It's permanent. Although any employee in New York State, any employee who's in the public sector who's watching this video can call us and they can get out of the forced payment of dues. They can't get out of the forced association that comes with union monopoly power, but they can get out of the forced payment of dues, which is it's half the job is done if we can say that you, Bob, as a public employee, can make the decision whether or not you want to financially support a labor union. That's good news. In the private sector, though, it's the federal government that imposes it on you in New York.
Well, getting a little bit more into the teacher issue, it's such an amazing thing that if you have a PhD in a real subject, not education, but a real subject, whether it's physics or chemistry or complex math, you are not going to get paid any more or get any promotions any more than somebody with a quote unquote education degree. So a PhD in a subject like science will not get any more than the other teachers who really have no expertise in science whatsoever and no background.
Yeah, we ended up getting involved in a case on behalf of a math teacher who was being incentivized to go to a rural school district, and they were going to give him a $10,000 signing bonus to teach math. He was very talented, bringing something to the academic institution that wasn't there yet, and he was coming in. And guess who objected to the $10,000 signing bonus? You're not surprised. It was the union official, and he had to give it back. They couldn't give it to him, so he went someplace else to teach. We have a lady right now we're representing in a charter school out in San Diego called ironically, it's called the Gompers Preparatory Academy. And Samuel Gompers, being the founder of the American labor movement here in the United States, in his final speech in 1924 to the AFL delegates in El Paso, Texas, he said, "The workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. Anything else is a menace to their rights." And what Gompers was trying to say, he realized that the delegates of the AFL were going to go to Congress and try to ask them to pass a forced fees bill, a forced unionism bill over the railroad industry, which they ended up getting in 1926. But Gompers pleaded with them, don't go to government for your power. But in this case, this teacher, was offered this bonus and they had to take it away because the union monopoly power said you can't give that worker more than someone who's been there 1 year or even 1 day more. But back to the Gompers Academy, we have a emergency room trauma center physician who left her job as a physician at a hospital, very successful career, to go teach in a charter school that was union free. In 2004, this school was a public school, and the gang violence and the lacking grades and the attrition, literally the 100% turnover of the teachers every year, forced the parents to go to the school board and say, we can't continue this way. And the school was converted from a government school to a charter school. The charter school comes in, they hire new employees, they are union free, grades start to go up, teachers start to stay, and the union comes in, 2 years ago and says, oh, guess what? We're taking over again. So now we're representing employees that want to try to get out of the union, and the government bureaucracy won't even allow them to have a vote to decertify the union in a school that was basically born of union-free academic freedom and managerial freedom that allowed it to grow in a way that parents were happy with, teachers were happy with. And oh, by the way, scholastic scores went up too, just an aside. But we can't have any of that.
Where I live, which is supposed to be, this great school system, which to me is the ultimate oxymoron. They call it the union-free school district. I don't understand. How could they be a union-free school district? How does that happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they can open up a charter school, some charter schools don't fall under the government law. And there's a question, although Biden's going to fix this. I mean, he has decided that every charter school is going to have to be under the private sector labor law, and then they're going to force them all to unionize. And but that's in the future. But what happens is some schools, charter schools, can operate outside of under state law. They don't have to be. Although charters, I think in New York, if they get to a certain number of students enrolled, they immediately fall under the state law, which allows unions to unionize them and organize them and all that stuff. But yeah, I think the experiment in an alternative to the government school system is working. And that scares the living daylights out of union officials and scares the living daylights out of legislators in most states, because they want the control that comes with a government school system that dictates curriculum and values. And I use my finger quotes when I talk about values, Bob, because we know what's happening in the government school systems these days, and it's not good. And that's why a private sector model, a market reaction to the government school system, grows. And the only way the union bosses can stop it, either to co-opt it, take it over, or stop it from occurring. And that's happening right now under this administration.
It's amazing. I thought the socialists were pro-choice.
Yes. What was Orwell's thing? Some pigs are all pigs
more
are
equal than others. Some animals are more equal than others.
Yeah. Forgive me for forgetting that. All pigs are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the average person will say, "Oh, before unions, you had children working in sweatshops, and there would have been no middle class. It would have only been the robber barons, and everybody else would be just working from hand to mouth and living a subsistence or below subsistence existence." How do you respond to that?
Well, I'd ask him to go back and research the founding of the Ford Motor Company and Henry Ford back in the 19-teens. I mean, Henry Ford basically innovated the mechanical assembly line for automotive manufacturing. His goal was to make sure that every household could afford an automobile and that every one of his workers could afford an automobile. But Henry Ford had a problem. I mean, he was paying wages that today would be, slave wages, as you talk about. I don't necessarily use that word because it was a different time. But he found the way that he was going to solve the attrition problem was to get this, reduce the workday down to 8 hours. Because, when you have 24 hours in a day and you want to run a continuous shift and you don't want people to work 16 hours, you divide 24 by 3. And what do you get? You get 8. So we have an 8-hour workday thanks to Henry Ford. And then what Henry Ford did, because of the turnover of his employees, he created a minimum wage. He said he would pay his workers $5 a day if they showed up for work and didn't beat their family members. I mean, literally, that was part of the contract he made with workers. Turnover ceased. GM and the other Buick or the Chrysler boys or the Buick boys or whoever it was during the time, they had to adjust to a market that was now raising wages, creating better work environments, and understanding that the employees were the secret to his success at Ford Motor Company. Without them, there is no Ford Motor Company. I believe that employers today are a lot more enlightened as it relates to how they treat their employees. And the market system creates substitutes. If an employer mistreats his employees, there are substitutes. There's other places they can go to work. They can go work and someone else will raise the wages. They'll find a way, a niche in a particular market to take advantage of it. And that advantage militates to our favor as workers. And what happened was the unions take credit for the weekend. They take credit for the 8-hour shift. They take credit for everything and anything that nobody who hasn't studied history understands. We're part of a growing industrial economy in the United States of America. True, there's injustice in the workplace, no question about it. But the laws in America protect workers' right to organize. If an employer doesn't take care of his employees, guess what? They can join together, amplify their voice. They can bring a third party in to speak for them, i.e. a union. They could do that in the 1900s. They could do that in the 1930s. They could do it in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. They can do it in 2020. Look at Amazon. Just recently, we had a great case study, the Amazon facility in Bessemer, Alabama. We had a president of the United States that cut a video encouraging these workers to join a union because it was the best thing that could happen. Bob, this was a unit of 5,800 employees at the Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama. 12.7% of the workers in that unit voted for the union. It was 85% Black unit. It was a sweet spot. Everybody, the big media, the big unions, the big politicians all said, this is a chip shot for us. We're finally going to get back at Amazon, we're going to unionize the facility. 12.7% of the workers eligible to vote for unionization voted to bring a union into their workplace. When you talk to people, when the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal talked to people after it, these workers said, why would we want to bring a union to talk to us? We make good wages, we're getting benefits. All the narrative about the election prior to the election was incorrect. The narrative that mattered was the final vote count, that 12.7%. Now the unions will file appeals and saying, well, Amazon abused these employees, they intimidate them. Nonsense. Union officials are the best at intimidating workers. I can guarantee you that, having been at the foundation and working and watching the clients that come to us day in and day out, talking about the injustice and the intimidation and the coercion they get from union officials. If an employer does it, it's against the law. If a union does it, yeah, well, it's just part of empowering workers to get back at capital. I don't buy it. And if you look at history, and Henry Ford's manufacturing plant in 1918 is a great example of how it works in real life. And I know people will disagree with that, but go back and look at what happened there, and you'll see. I say this: there was a place for unions, there is a place for unions, and there will be a place for unions in the American workplace. There's no place for force or compulsion. Let's agree on that.
Exactly. Well, you can take that into every area of today. But it's an interesting thing that the kids in school are reading all of these, what I call socialism studies textbooks.
Yep.
And of course, they're all telling you that FDR was the great hero who got us out of the Depression, you know, all the typical Keynesian nonsense. And so it's so hard to overcome that, because by the time they graduate from high school and then they go into college, it's even worse. You know, how do you overcome that is first question. And number two, and I'm not asking you to name names, but how do you explain the fact that most of the big corporations, maybe even all of them, are pushing socialism at every chance they get?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's talk about FDR and the so-called getting us out of the Depression. Amity Shlaes wrote a wonderful book called The Forgotten Man that shows dramatically how the Franklin Roosevelt's expansion of government, and ideally we were coming out of the economic malaise of that particular period until the federal government and the Supreme Court packing and the Jones and Laughlin. So you look, we had like another double dip as we look in 1937 and 38. And Amity does a great job of explaining that in her book called The Forgotten Man. If we don't understand history, we're condemned to repeat it. Santayana says these types of things. And I believe that to be true. And so what our responsibility is as citizens is to understand our history and understand that and understand these things. And unfortunately, they don't teach it at school. And Bob, as you might guess, when my kids have been outside the government school system, but even there, as I look at their science books and their social studies books, and particularly their history books, and I pick up the section from the 1920s and 1930s and read about labor unions, oh my goodness, we have to do an immediate remedial education about what the book says compared to what the reality is. And so you're right, there's one side of the story being told, and it militates in favor of this collectivism, this socialism, this idea of a class struggle. I mean, all of those kind of that rhetoric of Marxism. I mean, and we're seeing it in spades now. I mean, it's just incredible. The repeat of these arguments that have failed everywhere else they've been tried in the world, in world history, everywhere. Not one place can say it works, not one. And it's failed everywhere. And yet we're teaching that to our kids, not only in grade school, but college.
They will respond by saying, we just didn't do it enough.
There you go. It wasn't just
spent even more money.
That's right. That's the right answer.
They'll be like Colonel Sanders. We do chicken right. We do communism right. We'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And for the others, this idea of continuing to educate. I mean, it's an important job, and something that, I know you've committed to in the activities of your day and the activities of your career now, of talking about these issues, making sure people hear it. And this is part of that process. This conversation that we're having about labor policy is part of the process of helping people understand really what individual liberty looks like in the American workplace. And it doesn't model what the American model has turned out to be. And that is one predicated on forced unionism. I mean, I can't get over that. This idea that, the regressive left says, choice this, choice that, my choice. But when you take labor law, not only we dissected it as it relates to common law, contract law, agency law. Now let's just dissect it in the rhetoric of the left. Choice. Oh yeah, you get choice everywhere else, but you've got to have Bob's got to be your voice in the workplace. You can't speak, you can't talk. And oh, by the way, if you disagree with Bob, you got to pay him anyway. Or you disagree with Mark, you got to pay him anyway. It's outrageous. It's inconsistent. It's hypocrisy. But those descriptors those adjectives mean nothing anymore. The hypocrisy meter in this country has been off the needle. The needle's been pegged so far to the left that no one recognizes it. And even if they do, there's nothing to say about it. It's like, you just don't get it. And I disagree. And that's why the mission of the committee and the foundation is to continue to stand, no matter what the forces against us are, to stand up for individual freedom in the workplace. And that means the right to work laws that are in place in many states have provisions that say it protects your right to join a union. If your rights are violated, join the union. You can use the right to work law to help get your rights vindicated and get your rights presented to a judicial body to get them enforced. So the idea of joining or not joining is logic says the right to associate presupposes the right not to associate. You can't have the right to associate without the right not to associate. Logically, I don't understand what the actual Latin term is for that logic. You know it, Bob. I don't, but it's up here, right?
My dad told me an interesting story. He's been dead since 1976, but he was an extremely bright guy. He was put in reform school when he was assaulted by a teacher, and the teacher made a very big mistake because he hit back. So he got kicked out of school. He was put in a reformatory. So he just went in, he wound up escaping, and he was in the street during the Depression, and he saw an elderly woman who had been evicted. And somebody came over to him, and my father naturally felt sorry for the woman. Anybody would. And they said, "Isn't that terrible?" My father said, "Yes, of course it's terrible." Well, wouldn't you want to do something about it? My father said, "Sure." So he invited him to a meeting. And it was a union meeting, but it was actually a Communist Party meeting. And my father wound up getting a job in the Garment Center in New York. In those days, they had the ILGWU, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union.
Yep.
And when they saw how smart he was, they sent him to like executive training school to turn him into a union leader. But he objected to some of the goings on there. And he went to work the next day, and they told him he had no job. And then he went to what's called the union bench, where you sit in a big hall and you sit there and you sit there. And it was clear that they were not going to give him a job, no matter how long he sat there. And one of the other things he noticed is that the people who were the average workers, they were married guys with families, and they would eventually leave the meeting because they wanted to spend time with their kids and their wife and have dinner, whatever. But the others would stay behind. And then they would vote on these communist totalitarian measures when there was nobody there to oppose them. So that gave my father a real bird's eye view of communism for what it really is and how seductive it is, because it appeals to the Jews call it the evil inclination, the Christians call it original sin. So it's man's darker side: jealousy, selfishness, greed, not treating people the way you'd like to be treated, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what you're always fighting against. And of course, today you have all the major companies, as far as I can see, placating all of the regressive, progressive socialism going on. And they've got the big money. And the average guy can't afford the fight. They can afford the fight. And so one team is on the field, it's the corporate Leviathan, and the average guys, they can't even put up a defense on the football field. And without a defense, the offense is going to score. And this is, I see this is what you're trying to do. you're trying to help what Amity Shales called the forgotten man.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get to your question. You asked a really important question about the big corporations. I mean, before, and I apologize for not getting that, but you're right. I mean, we found at Right to Work that the largest corporations in America are opposed to what we do at Right to Work because they're very comfortable, having one person sit down with them every 3 to 5 years, determining what's going to be appropriate for everybody in the bargaining unit, whether they're good at it, bad at it, the worst at it, the best at it, and just saying, apply these principles across the board. You take care of our problems. We won't worry about it. And we're glad to hand over our workforce to you. And oh, by the way, you're right. We'll give you a dues check off and we'll forward the money to you and we'll make everybody pay union dues as condition of keeping their jobs. And we'll let you we'll fire them if you tell us to. I mean, that's kind of the mindset of the largest businesses in the country. And frankly, they're victims of really kind of their own size and inability to maneuver, because once somebody attacks them, the ultimate or the immediate reaction is, let's solve that problem. I mean, a CEO of a publicly traded company who usually moves on every 4 or 5 or 6 years, I mean, they just don't want any waves. And boy, oh boy, is the other side good at making waves and being the squeaky wheel. I mean, I think it was the communists, Bob, that claimed the people. They always said, we have the people. Well, they never had the people, but what they did have is a small percentage, a vanguard of kind of elites that would make the noise, and they would be the proof to the lies that the higher ups would say, well, see, don't you see this unrest? I mean, we've got to fix that. And I think the large corporations in America, as they continually try to placate and try to make these disturbances go away, they pay for it. And, it's just it's a line item for them. And yet then when things turn ugly, it's their stores that are being looted. It's their stores that are being broken into. It's their employees that are being harassed and hurt and intimidated. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all, except for, I see a problem, I have to make it go away. I can't afford to deal with it because it might be too unworkable, or I might not be politically correct enough, or someone might write a story in the New York Times about me, or, fill in the blank. So this capitulation to this intimidation is something that labor union officials have used extremely effectively, not only against employers, but against employees.
I don't know if you're familiar with the book by James Cunin, The Strawberry Statement, Notes of the Student Revolutionary. And he was, one of the SDS guys from the 70s. And they had a communist convention, of all places, at the Waldorf Astoria.
Real comfortable. Yeah, they needed to be comfortable. Yeah.
And he said he couldn't believe it because at the meeting, they had all these people from Esso Corporation, which is now, I guess, Exxon Mobil. Mm-hmm. It used to be Tony the Tiger. Remember that? Yep. And he says they were all handing us checks. And I said to myself, what's going on here? They're the evil capitalists. They're the enemy. Why are they funding us? Well, communism has always been promoted by the rich, because communism, in fact, if you read Marx and Engels' 2 main books, Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, they never attack rich people in that book. They attack the bourgeoisie. Mm-hmm. They hated, and that's why, by the way, Marx wrote the essay on the Jewish question. He hated the Jews because in those days, Jews were normally not in big business, except for some of the banks. But in general, Jews were the little shopkeepers, the merchants, the entrepreneurs, which is what, for the average person, is a way to have some economic mobility. And so Marx, even though he had been born to a Jewish family, hated their guts and wrote the essay on the Jewish question. And people today still can't get into their heads that the capitalists, or what they call the capitalists, I don't call them capitalists, I'm for free enterprise. These people are not capitalists. They are absolute socialists. And look what they're doing to the worker because of the Federal Reserve, which is supported by the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. People are not going to be able to eat. Already this year, Lumber is up 300%. Copper is way up. Even oil, even though it went down below zero for a while,
Yeah.
now. So they are screwing, if you will, the average working class person and the average middle class person, and their real wages, in other words, after inflation, after the cost of living, are actually going down despite what either side of the phony equation, and I call it the worldwide wrestling show.
Yeah.
Take Hulk Hogan on one side and the Mad Sheik on the other side. It's all fake, and the average person wants to just be able to be, oh, he's bad because he's got that label, and he's good because he's got that label, and they're not able to see that this is just a giant con game. This is the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. And the fact of the matter is, the president doesn't have any power. The central banks tell them what to do. We've been taken over. And you could see it when these creeps speak, whether it's Powell or Janet Yellen or Bernanke. Remember Bernanke when he said, oh, the real estate mortgage problem is well contained. Oh, yeah, it was well contained. And Larry Kudlow said there is zero chance of there being a problem. That was 2006. And then you throw back in their face what they said, and there's no accountability. I mean, if that was me, I'd be apologizing profusely, asking for forgiveness. But no, they never apologize because people can't pay attention enough to see the contradictions from day to day, not even from year to year. They change their story every day. Janet Yellen, when she resigned as head of the Fed, said that there will never be an economic crisis again in her lifetime. Well, just a few weeks ago, she said, we're in an economic crisis. But she didn't say I was wrong. Never. They never say they're wrong. So, all we have to do is keep pointing out that the emperor has no clothes. And we have to do it forcefully and with facts, not emotions. We've got to be logical. We've got to have information. There's the old saying, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
Yeah.
Well, this is what impressed me when I first heard you speak in Manhattan last year, pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And I must say that I applaud you for your courage in coming on this Zoom program without wearing a mask.
Well, I got to be careful about that. The Virginia governor has imposed really draconian permanent powers on small businesses, and we're kind of a small business here at Right to Work, and we have lots of rules we have to follow. But right now, no one's within 6 feet of me, Bob. I promise you. Okay. Yeah.
You're practicing socialist distancing, right?
There you go. Yeah, there you go. And by the way, I called my wife when the oil went down to -40 a barrel. I said, honey, can we just use the front yard and they'll pay us $40 to bring barrels of oil to our house? And I don't know how long I'll have to stay there, but -40 on a barrel of oil. I was like, okay, something's wrong with the financial system when stuff like that happens. And those rumbles and those roller coasters are going to be more frequent, unfortunately, I think, with what are literally trillions of dollars that are being pushed into the system now with oh, don't worry. I mean, and Powell, I shouldn't be even talking about this, but Powell the other day when he was interviewed, he said, oh, don't worry, we're not worried about inflation at all in the short term. We just got to get everything under control and get the country back on track. My wife comes home from the grocery store yesterday and she said, Mark, I was at Costco the other day. We buy food in bulk with a larger family. And she goes, I bought 7 things and it cost me $250. It's like, what did you buy? She goes, nothing. I mean, that's where we are. It's really unfortunate. And sheets of plywood going out for, as you said, 7-8 times the cost that it was a month ago or 2 months ago. But don't worry, Bob, there's no inflation. In our hedonistic analysis, we just take those things that grow in price and just take them out of the basket of goods and then recalculate. Isn't that what they do? Isn't that how that works? Yeah.
It's nothing but lies. So let's tell the viewer, because we're winding down now time-wise. Let's tell the viewers what they can do to get involved. How can they find out more information? How do they support you? Take us through the gamut of those things.
Sure. Well, Bob, thank you for, first of all, the opportunity to have a conversation. I enjoyed it very much, and look forward to another one in the future. And maybe if without a camera running, I can talk about a few other issues that I know you know something about. So thanks for the opportunity. But look, our work is, we're here at the National Right to Work Committee. That's nrtwc.org. That's our legislative operation. If you want to know what's going on in your state legislatively, you can go there. As it relates to labor policy, that is, you can find out what your legislature's up to, wherever it is. We track legislation in all 50 states across the country. We also keep an eye on what's happening in Washington, D.C. and the bills they have there. So you can find that there. You can find out about whether you live in a right to work state or not, one of the 27, and what your rights are in those states by going to the committee's website. You can find out what's happening legislatively. If you want to know about your legal rights and your rights in America's workplace, you can go to the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation's website. That's nrtw.org, nrtw.org. And there's a whole bunch of, self-identifying questions that you can see the answers to about what your rights are. First of all, if you're forced into a union, how do you get out of a union? How do you get rid of a union? How do you get into a union? You'll find that in there. You'll find out your rights vis-a-vis the Janus decision. If you're a public employee, if you're a school teacher across the country, you can find out where your rights are. And if you have any questions, you can call the 800 number, 1-800-336-3600, and you can talk to an attorney. Get this, Bob, for free.
Oh, boy.
Free. No retainer, no hourly charge. We represent employees for free. And you can talk to an attorney. And obviously, we won't talk to you about your neighbor's homeowners association claim against you. But if you have a labor law question as it relates to your workplace, we can help you. And if the case is something that we have expertise in and we have a history in, we'll represent you. We'll do that. We'll take your case to the National Labor Relations Board. We can take your case to the state court. However it needs to be done, our attorneys are here to help. Yesterday, we celebrated the beginning of the 51st year of our legal director's career here at Right to Work. Not only do we have a core of people that have been with us for a long time because they love what they do and they love to help American workers all across the country, but we've got a good group of young people that have argued cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. You can talk to them about what your rights are, and you can find all that information at the foundation's website at nrtw.org.
Well, it was indeed a great pleasure and an honor to you. People say when they talk to me, it's a great pressure, not a pressure. But you're a man for all seasons, as the famous movie about St. Thomas More spoke with regards to. And I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm sure we can talk again. And anytime you need any help or whatever I can do, I'm just an average guy who's not that popular on Facebook and YouTube.
Well, I'm probably not either, Bob. I'm probably not either, I'm sure.
God bless you, and God bless your family.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a privilege. Appreciate your time and your interest in this issue and the opportunity to talk about it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Take care.